Welcome, everyone. Here we are in the sixth day of our festival with our sixth briefing done by our great speaker, Dave. I'd stood in on Tuesday, but Dave's doing today and one next week. And we also have a communications one next week with Terry Moriden, who is a professional communications very experienced expert who's been working with us, and you may well have met anyway. So just for those who may be new, this is one of our briefings to help you put proposals, ideas in on the 31st of August. And you should have a guide which will tell you about the sort of proposals we're looking for. The key thing is we're not looking for something hugely detailed, but something interesting, different, innovative, that could be developed. So don't be overwhelmed, and do draw on what you know and where you are at. So don't get, because it's already, you know, when you see that there's that boiling the sea problem, it all seems overwhelming. But you can find things, issues to address, things that are immediately around you. And well, maybe that's a reasonable introduction for this week's today's session with Dave. Act like an entrepreneur, and I will hand it to you, and look forward to hearing what you've got to say in the following discussion. Great stuff.
Thanks, Henry. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're well. So hopefully you've been kind of following along with the process. Even if you haven't, kind of briefly in recap, what we've been trying to do is gather together our moments of inspiration and our spare parts and our ideas, and then try and work out if people actually kind of want or need any of those insights, and really trying to understand the users for whom we're trying to create value. Who are the beneficiaries and what do they want and how do they want it? And we moved from there into the idea of kind of generating real sorts of solutions and kind of potential responses, and then starting to think about how we evaluate those. And then Henry spoke earlier this week about the idea of kind of systems, about thinking about an idea within a system as a way to both kind of understand where it fits and how you might act on it, but also to think about the consequences of acting on it, that actually whenever you change something within a system, other things change too. And some of those things that change are the things that you want to change, and some of those things that change are not, and there might be unintended consequences. So we're going to step on from there, because partly this week was using the RSA's mantra of think like a system, act like an entrepreneur. So understand things in the round, but then act like an entrepreneur to do something about it. And you'll see what I mean in a couple of moments. So one of the things we're going to share this morning is a thing called the Lean Startup Methodology. Now that sounds like something you might encounter in business school, possibly, but equally, it's something that I've found enormously useful and liberating for all of the ideas that I have. And whether I'm thinking with a sort of kind of policy change hat on, whether I'm thinking about social and civic purpose, charitable endeavors, activism, actually, you will find some usefulness in the ideas within the Lean Startup methodology. That leads us very naturally into prototyping, and then we're just going to recontextualize ourselves by thinking about where we are in the challenge and what we're going to be doing next time. So our innovation process, we remember, is not linear. We will feel like we're going backwards sometimes as well as forwards. We will occasionally tie ourselves up in knots, and then we'll try and work our way back out of that knot. It's not some neat kind of straightforward process. Hopefully by now, we've done the bit where we're thinking about what the right thing to do is, and we're actually starting to make the thing right. So we've kind of hopefully found something that other people think is valuable and interesting, and we're now trying to make sure that that does everything it could in the most effective way possible. And we're trying to move from having the idea to executing on the idea, because actually ideas are relatively cheap. Actually, a well-executed idea that delivers value, they are much harder to find. So we've been moving through this idea of kind of discovering what the problem really is and the dimensions of it, to defining what we want to do about it, to developing some potential solutions that we might use, and then finally delivering solutions that work. And we're very much at this stage starting to think about actually how do we deliver those solutions that work. So we've done the what and the who and the why, and we're very much in the how. So lean startup. Ooh, too far. Now, you might not know who these two chaps are, but they're really rather important to this story. So the dark-haired chap on the left is a man called Ries, and we'll come to him in a moment. And the chap on the right is a guy called Steve Blank. And Steve Blank is a California-based kind of VC turned entrepreneurial educator, extraordinarily successful, well worth kind of following, wrote some really great books on how to start things up. And is very much kind of regarded as kind of almost like the grandfather of the venture creation movement. Now, he said this: no business plan survives first contact with the customer. And what he means by this is that whatever you think you're going to do, it probably isn't going to work. Equally, I could have quoted the boxer Mike Tyson here, who famously said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And now that might seem like terrible advice, but again, it's probably true. What you're trying to do is you're trying to avoid catastrophe. So the worst way to think about this is to build and build and build and build and build and build and plan and plan and plan and plan and plan and plan. And only after you've sunk loads of time and energy and goodwill into something do you show anybody. At which point it crashes hugely and expensively and is a kind of a Zeppelin scale error. Actually, it'll be much more sensible to share things early before you've spent all that time and energy and love on them, so that actually you get feedback that allows you to move on quickly without wasting your time or anybody else's. So at the heart of the lean startup movement is this idea of making small iterative steps. You make a small step forward, you test it out, you build on that, you take a small step forward, you test it out. And sometimes you'll go backwards, and that's fine. But over time, you will make forward progress. So again, I've mentioned this before, the reason that most startups fail, and actually I think you can read into this, the reason that most ideas fail, is that nobody wants them. There's no market need. That actually you've done this amazing thing, and people go, yeah, whatever, mate. Or they go, oh, I've got something that almost does that. That's fine. Or this is okay. I'll stick with this. That's easier. I know how to do it. Or that looks like a lot of work. So Ries, pictured a few moments ago, wrote this book called The Lean Startup, and it was very much about the idea of don't just keep planning, take those assumptions out and go and test them. Engage your stakeholders early. Find out, who wants it, who's going to back it, who's going to fund it. Who are the people that you need to have on side, and talk to them early and get a sense of what they want and what they don't want and how they want it. And even if actually you still want to change their opinion on that, great, but you know what you're dealing with. You're not working in ignorance anymore. And he also kind of made this point about trying to avoid what he called vanity metrics. So don't measure things that don't really matter. So you could say, hey, 1,000 people have visited our website. Okay, how many of them actually engaged with the content? Oh, only 10. And how many of them actually signed up for your newsletter? 1. Okay, the vanity metric here is the number of eyeballs. The useful numbers are those about kind of engagement and activism. So how do you test what really matters? And this is about knowing what makes a difference in the context of your idea. He also talked about this idea of failing fast and failing forward, that we should embrace failure. We shouldn't run away from it. We shouldn't fear it. We should run towards it as hard as we can. Because actually, we can beat it, we can find our way around it. And by doing it, we get feedback. We get feedback on why it failed. And then we can use that to do it better. So this idea of failing forwards. And at the heart of Ries's model is this idea of build, measure, learn. So how do we build something that allows us to get some meaningful feedback at a really low cost? How do we then measure the feedback so that we're accurately determining what happens next? Like, oh, they liked it because of this, rather than, well, they liked it. We don't know why they liked it. That's not actually that useful. And then we learn, and then we build the next one, and we keep iterating. And this cycle is at the heart of the lean startup movement. So it's already start to think about, in the context of your idea, what could you be building that would allow you to measure the reaction that you get, that would allow you to build a better version? So, in Eric's words, the goal of a lean startup is to inform our riskiest business model assumptions. What are the biggest guesses we're making? And to do this through empirical testing with customers, so actually with users, not just rhetorical reasoning on a whiteboard. So it's very easy just to talk amongst yourselves and talk amongst the people who think like you think. actually that's only so useful. If you're trying to change other people's position, trying to create value for other people, you need to go talk to those people. You need to try these ideas out with those people. So at the heart of this is the validation piece that we've been pushing for the program. Get out of the building. Go and test this out with other people. So just before I step into the next stage, all of this is really at the heart of entrepreneurship. A lot of what good entrepreneurs do is they go and test things with people. They act. One of the single biggest characteristics of entrepreneurial behavior is a preponderance to act rather than sometimes to plan and to think. So whilst I'm not saying entrepreneurs don't plan and think, they absolutely do, but they also know that they need to act, that they need to do something, that they can't just sit on the idea forever. That one of the most valuable things they can do is to take it out into the world and to show it to people and to see what happens, and that you learn quicker through doing. So this kind of idea of experiential learning. So this gets us into this idea of, well, actually, how do you take it out to people, and what can you show people? How do you prototype the ideas that you've got? So some ways of testing and refining an idea. On the top right, there might be a device there that's the older amongst you might recognize. So this was a Palm Pilot. So this is in a way, an early precursor to a smartphone, except it doesn't have a phone. So it's the notebook, it's the notepad, it's the contact list, it's the calendar. It's a way of digitally kind of filing your stuff to carry around rather than carrying a Filofax or a diary around. Now, obviously, the black object on the left is a finished Palm Pilot that hit the market. It's made out of plastic. It's got microelectronics in it. It's got kind of, somebody's built some software for it. It was prototyped using the object on the right. Now, the object on the right is a block of wood with a piece of paper around it. But that block of wood with the piece of paper around it allows you to do a few different things. It allows you to test whether it fits in a pocket. It allows you to test whether it feels nice and the right weight in your hand. And by putting the piece of paper around it, he could draw different images that the screen might show. He could draw different menu structures. He could draw different numbers of buttons on the device. So people could work out how many buttons it ought to have. They could work out how the menu should work. So the inventor had this rule that said, everything should be accessible within 3 touches of the button. And actually there should be a minimum and a maximum number of buttons on it. But he could work all this out with a block of wood and a piece of paper before he went anywhere near injection molded plastics, microelectronics, software development, screen technology. You can do an awful lot with very little. So to give you another example, the one below it, you may never have heard of Zappos. You may have it probably if you're based in the US. So Zappos is an online shoe store. Now, at the point at which Zappos first launched, nobody bought shoes online, or very few. And actually, whenever anyone said, hey, we could do like an Amazon retail shop for shoes, everyone said, oh, no. When you buy shoes, you go to a shop and you try them on. That's how people buy shoes. They won't want to buy them online. So if you were going to try and prototype this business, what would you do? What's the biggest assumption? Now, you could buy a warehouse, fill it full of shoes, build an all singing, all dancing website, hire sales staff, hire customer service staff, spend an awful lot of money on advertising. But actually, you still don't know if people are willing to buy shoes online or not. So that feels like a very big risk. So what this guy did was he built a very basic website. He invested in some online marketing to kind of promote shoe sales to a few people. And then what he did was he went around all his local shoe shops and he took photographs of their shoes. And then he put those photographs on his website. And when somebody bought from his website, he ran down to that shoe shop, bought the pair of shoes out of the shop, and then put them in the post himself. Now, that's no way to run a successful business. That's really expensive. However, it allowed him to prove that people were willing to buy shoes online because people did it. And he hadn't spent very much money at all in creating that test. But because he had that evidence, he could then go to investors to say, look, none of you believe it's possible, but people are willing to buy shoes online. They are willing to do this. They're spending real money in a real shop and getting real shoes. Invest in me so I can buy my warehouse, hire my staff, fill it full of shoes. So think about how you can test stuff. And here are some ideas. So you could just interview some of those key users and say, would you buy this? Or would you do this? If I did this, how would you respond to that? You could float the idea on social media. You could mock something up and say, hey, we're going to do this. And as long as you've got a note that says, actually, we're not quite ready to do this yet. Sorry. But what we're doing is we're testing how interested people are. That's fine. You could, rather than make an interface for a website or an app, you could make one out of PowerPoint and just show people what you think it would look like and get them to think about how they'd use it. You could make a physical mock-up. You could make something out of cardboard and paper. Some of the best first stages of an app I've ever seen have been made on paper. You could do a digital mock-up. There's loads of tools out there these days. Stuff like Adobe XD, great place to start if you want to do a sort of almost all singing, all dancing kind of mock-up. You could get a prototype crowdfunded. You could go out to some likely people and say, would you invest in me to make the first one of these? You could do surveys or votes for preference. You could do a kind of pop-up shop or pop-up event and see if people attend. But these are all ways of testing things out more cheaply. And this happens at every level of a business. Even something as expensive as a wind tunnel for testing aircraft parts is fundamentally still cheaper than crashing aircraft. So think about how you might test things kind of cheaply and easily. And that is about thinking like an entrepreneur. This one is really useful, actually, particularly around, I think, for activism and kind of policy stuff, but this idea of a minimum viable audience. So could you build up a following about potentially your idea in the future by talking just about the problem? Like, could you be blogging or writing or podcasting about a particular problem that you see in the world and curating interesting people, interesting talkers, or interesting solutions that have turned up in other parts of the world? Because if you can build up that audience, that kind of says that there is a market for your idea when your idea is finally shown to people. But you can do an awful lot just talking about the problem area. And you can use this group as a way of validating the ideas that you have about what you want to do. And you can get them excited with your progress. You might even be able to sell them an early adopter version of something. And you can use their insights and their testimonials into that testing process for your launch sales. Like you'll have already had people test your product out, test your ideas out, test your kind of policy ideas out, and you can use that testimonial to validate that they work. And this can also be the basis of a crowdfunding campaign. Lots of times when I work with particularly students who are interested in causes, I also go and write about the cause. See if you can generate some interest, see if you can link to interesting people, build a groundswell up of likely people who you think are probably your kind of future target customers, or at least your target stakeholders. And then you can start to feed your content in amongst the broader discussion. You can start to put your ideas in and see how people respond to them. It's a really useful strategy. So one way of capturing all of this, so strategizing, we've used a lot of their tools over the last few sessions, is to think about how you deliberately test and learn. So this makes it quite a scientific process, which I think is actually very useful. So you have a hypothesis, you think people are going to buy this product. And to verify that, we're going to try and sell it. And we're going to measure how many people actually do it. And we're right if enough people do this. That allows you to specify, what does success look like? How do we know that we've tested this assumption out and that it's worked? And then you can complete a learning card when that experiment is done. You had a belief, what you actually observed was this. And from doing that, you learned a certain set of things. And therefore, the next thing you're going to do is this. Now, you don't have to use these exact cards. You could simply use these questions. But it's a really good way of taking the assumptions that are in your idea and going and testing them. Like, you've made a whole bunch of guesses. How do you validate them? Here's a method. So you might have a whole bunch of assumptions. You're going to need to prioritize which ones you test and in what order. You're going to need to run those tests. And you need to capture those learnings. So, learning from this, we talked about this a little bit last week. This idea of moving from, hey, it works on paper, to actually it works in the market. People genuinely seem to want it, and actually enough people wanted it, and enough people were willing to pay me to do it to make it worthwhile. So you're starting to build these levels of validation, these levels of evidence that are really rather useful when you then try and bring other people on board. So, you're starting to prove that it's desirable. You're starting to prove it's feasible and it can work. And you're starting to prove that it's viable, that actually it can be done at a particular cost. And these are all things that you can be testing. Now, you don't have to just test in one category. You can test in all three. And what this allows is that by the time you get in front of a group of stakeholders, by the time you get in front of any dragons, that actually you've got evidence. Not only are you proving how dedicated you are because you've done all these experiments, but you're also proving that the thing works because you've got evidence back from those experiments that it works. And actually nothing impresses people more than previous success. That actually, if you've been building up this body of evidence, that puts you in a really good position. I've seen some what I thought were potentially quite weak ideas, but because the person coming to me with what I thought was a slightly silly idea had a load of evidence that counter to my intuition, it actually worked. Fine, great. I'll back it. I'll believe you because you've got the evidence. So there are lots of tools out there. We mentioned some of these in terms of kind of validating and assessing ideas. There's some stuff in there for kind of going out and doing kind of lean processes as well. So I'm not going to say too much more. What we're doing this week is exploring the system that our idea fits within. And we're starting to think about how we test and prototype. And actually, one of the ways that we might test and prototype is to put that idea in the system and see how it connects and interacts with it. But what I'd be encouraging you to do is go and prototype, to go and think about how you do really simple, low-cost tests of whether the idea works or not. What we're going to be talking about on Tuesday is about overcoming the barriers. And there are some links, obviously, between this session and the next session. And we're going to be thinking about how we battle competitors, how we battle alternatives, how we battle inertia. Lots of people are stuck in the status quo. So how do we think about dealing with those things? And clue, having good evidence that your thing works, that because you've tried it and you've tested it and you've acted upon it, that really makes a difference. So the workshop challenges are going to be kind of designing, at least a couple of experiments or tests that help you validate your idea, and starting to think about what the most important things for you to test out are. But I will stop here and open the floor to any kind of questions and queries that there might be.
Do you want to close your? Yeah, that's it. Brilliant. Yeah. While people are thinking of their questions, one of the things I've been sort of reflecting on is the difference between a sort of a private sector or sort of commercial enterprise as opposed to a sort of NGO enterprise. And it seems to me that it's about commercial enterprise is not interested in changing the system to some extent, or not primarily. It's interested in trying to make a business that makes money. And actually, if you can...
One caveat to that would be that sometimes there's quite a lot to be... There's a lot of opportunity in disrupting a system.
True. So, yes, but you're not... Whereas you're not primarily aimed at changing the system. It may be a means to an end.
Yeah.
Whereas with an NGO, you're almost certainly trying to change the system. And I wondered if that means fundamentally you do go about things in a different sort of way.
I don't know. Personally, I find lean a very compelling system because it makes the whole thing very approachable. That actually you don't necessarily have to be an expert. You don't necessarily have to have the biggest networks and the most resources. And it stops the whole idea of making change from being this kind of really exclusive club. Something I often get back from particularly kind of young people trying to make change is that it can feel like they're trying to participate in an elite sport for which they do not have the resources. And actually, once you start thinking that, well, okay, how do I start making very small tests and building evidence that actually you can do lots with very little, because you can start to go and prove it and you can start to build up evidence. And it is about kind of, you know, putting one step in front of another, but at a small and iterative level. And it builds confidence, it builds skills, it builds evidence, and actually it stops you being intimidated by everything. Like at heart, the lesson of being an entrepreneur is go and do stuff. Like at a certain point, you just have to try.
No, I totally agree. And I suppose the question for me is how you do it, because I would say if you're trying to do system change, there are very specific conditions for a pilot or a prototype to work, i.e. you have to find a set of people who agree in the need for the system change and are willing, because of short-term benefits to them, or reasonably short-term benefits, to invest in that process to do it. So in terms of, we are trying to, one of the things we're trying to do is fundamentally change how landscapes are managed. We think we've now found a set of people in a particular landscape, in a particular place, who have a set of relationships, and you know, there are linkages that into a national dialogue, etc., for us to prototype in a way that will actually be influential.
But you've learned a lot through doing in that example, because you've kind of mentioned it before. So in a sense, like, one way of doing this would have been to think for a long time about where the right place is to do something, find the right people to do the right thing. Actually, you can get an awfully long way, almost just through trial and error, by going, right, I'm going to do a little thing over here. Do you respond? No, okay. Try over here, try over there, try that, try this. And actually, what often happens is you start to talk to people about one thing and they tell you about another thing. And actually, it's the other thing that allows you to have a route forward. And I guess the big thing I'm trying to stop people doing is sitting by themselves going, this is the thing that needs doing and this is the way to do it, and spending loads of time and energy on that, and then only at the last minute going and saying, hey, look at this amazing thing.
Oh yeah. No,
and people go, yeah, whatever, mate.
Yeah. I think, no, I totally agree with that. And but sometimes I would say, you know, a lot of it might be about conversations with people who say, well, where might this work? Are there people who could we work with? And finding, like, so the person who found us, the place where we're prototyping, happened to be working with a range of different groups around England. So he knew he was sort of doing something in the right sort of space, and I discovered that. And he could say, well, of the 6 people we're working with, the one in Hampshire Avon are probably in the right space in terms of being ready to do something like that, whereas the others a bit, and we might be able to get some money. Anyway, let's take some questions. We've got the first question. Is there a minimum number of people you would recommend speaking to and getting feedback from?
It's highly contextual. There is definitely a point of diminishing returns. When you get to a point when actually almost everyone that you talk to is telling you the things that other people have already told you, you probably don't need to keep asking. So if you start to get to a point where actually you are just finding that you're not finding out anything new at any great rate, that's probably the mark. There is not a right number of people. In certain contexts, you might find that somebody might say, well, no, you need to talk to a certain number of organizations or a certain number of people. Like, in the words of my dad, who's a plumber, it's like, you should always get 3 quotes whenever you get any building work done. Like, 3 is a good number. Yeah, I would always say to my students, they ought to, you know, if they're seeking experts, they should always talk to at least 3, just because it allows you to get away from having a kind of binary, well, this person said this and this person said something completely different. If you're going out to the general public, those numbers can be much bigger. Obviously, if it's surveys and you've only managed to survey 5 people, that's problematic. If you've been doing focus groups and you only focus groups like once, that could be problematic. You're just trying to get to a point where you feel like the data that you're getting back is robust, representative, insightful, but hopefully you're not just getting the same old responses again and again and again.
I would sort of add to that. I would say if you're more in the system change space, part of the reason you talk to people is trying to sort of recruit them to your cause, in a sense, in that you're trying to get them on side to work with you. So it's not, you're looking for data in that if they say, well, that's a silly idea, I'm not interested, and don't ring back, then that's you never see them again. Well, that's a data spot. If on the other hand said, look, this is really important, I think I can help you. And quite often they will then introduce you to other people and say, the person you really need to speak to and would be great to talk to, and they will send you to somewhere else. And then you talk to them and they say, yeah, well, it's not that, but that person. So you may have a sort of, and you'll then meet the person who's really, hopefully, will be working with you. And then I think there's numbers and there's diversity. So you're trying, I think, system to create a bit of a coalition of people who are working with you. So for me, I work with some academics, and that's one lot, but I don't want academics alone. I want people in policy, I want people in finance, I want people in business. And then the sort of person you want, because of course, if you're trying to link with people, you want people who are linked to other people. So a quality person to talk to is someone who also has lots of links, and is, and also is a bridging person. So is someone who is not necessarily, in a particular group and that's all they know, but also has a diversity of relationships.
You're absolutely right. I think there are, in terms of engaging stakeholders, there are different things you want. Sometimes you just want an answer. Sometimes you want the connectivity. Sometimes you want them to be more involved. I think the first time you go, you should be clear in your mind about what you want from a conversation, from an interaction with anyone that you do. Some of them are, you want a view and then you're away, and actually you don't necessarily need engagement in the longer term, or not at that point. You just needed something, and then you need to go away and work on it for a while before you bring it back again. So I think as long as you're clear, and as long as you frame your questions and you frame your interaction in a way that doesn't leave them feeling shortchanged, actually, yeah, you can do these multiple functions.
Yeah. And I think you do, this is a key. Yes, as you meet people, they say, but have you thought of X? And so through that process, your idea is hopefully continuously evolving and changing, slightly reframed the story you're telling. So during that, day one, why don't we do X? And by 2 months, once you've talked to a few people, it's not X, it's X plus 3 minus Y, et cetera, because you've tested things out. So you're testing, building relationships, building links, building momentum, all in sort of one process, if you like.
But interestingly, I think this links to the question that's currently upvoted in the Q&A.
Yeah. Let's just.
How do you avoid people giving you the answers that they think you want to hear? Now, the danger of obviously holding some of these people close to you because you want them involved in your process means that they might take some ownership in your process, which in some cases is what you want. But if they've got a bit of ownership, they might also be trying to tell you the things that you want to hear. So in some ways, I think this is a good reason for, in a few cases, keeping people ever so slightly apart, that there are people that you ask questions of, and there are people that you kind of consult in a slightly more involved way. I think partly this is about test design. How do you test it in such a way that you're not asking a leading question, that effectively they don't think there's a right answer to give? So sometimes we refer to this as the mum test. Because if you ask your mum, I've done this, do you like it? Your mum will go, oh, of course I like it, darling. That's wonderful. That's really good work. Because what they want out of giving you that reaction isn't the same as what you want. They want to show that you're loved and appreciated and that you do brilliant things. They're not trying to give you an honest answer. So actually, there's a real trick here in talking to strangers. And there's a real trick here in putting things in front of people where you are not loading it with, and you will destroy me if you give me bad feedback. So you need to find a way to put things in front of people and go, do you prefer this or this? And you are able to stay away or stay neutral. So just think about when you're trying to frame questions, when you're offering up choices in a prototype, how you put your poker face on, how you stay a little bit decoupled from that, so that people are not trying to keep you happy or trying to annoy you, potentially, by saying a particular thing, so that you're trying to get an honest answer to the question. And it might be that you even need to use almost proxies. You might need to use other people to show things or to ask things so that you get reactions that are different to the ones that you get, because you just might be too close to this. And people might notice that and might not want to hurt your feelings.
I think the other thing is that to differentiate between the why, the how, and the what. Because actually, in the more the system change rather than prototype products as such, you're making the contact, and what you have to have in common, if you like, and why they're bothering is the why. They believe in the cause. Of course, the how and the what, they may not agree with at all. And actually, one test as to whether they're do believe in it or not is what they commit to as a result. And people can be very blunt. I mean, when I started out with promoting economic pluralism, I remember reaching out to a guy, big name, and he said, yeah, it's a nightmare the way these mainstream economists dominate everything. I've been banging my head against a brick wall the last 50 years trying to do something. I've never got anywhere. So I'm not doing that anymore. I'm doing something else. And so I don't want to be involved in your project because, I don't think it'll work. And actually, so even though we were both part of the, we both agreed totally on the cause, the how and the what he wasn't in for.
If you can separate that out and you can ask questions sequentially that sort of go, this is a course that interests you, okay, and then what do you think you should do about it? Equally, I would also make the case to say sometimes asking people is about the worst thing that you can do, but watching people is a really good thing to do. What do people actually do when they don't think they're being watched? What do people actually do? How do they actually spend their money? Because loads of us say things to other people about how we behave. Lots of us say things to ourselves about how we behave that are just not true. So this is about good experimental design. How do you actually really rigorously test what it is that people will do in a given circumstance? And it just requires a little bit of creative thought. There are lots of kind of good sources and sites and materials out there that can help you think about good experimental question design. But this is really thinking like a scientist. How do you filter out all of the complicating factors that might impinge on the outcome so that you're actually testing what it is that you want to test?
Just to maybe move to the next one. I've heard of companies pushing their product out at a loss to get awareness. How long should you do this before you get the awareness, then sell at a price that makes money?
So yeah, I mean, obviously doing stuff for free, business there is a business model here, because it allows you to often get out to a very big audience very quickly. So you only have to look at things like kind of any freemium business model, Skype, WeTransfer, Dropbox, they spread like wildfire because they're free. So everybody goes, hey, I'm using this thing, it's free, you could probably use it too. And I'll use that, that's quite useful. The trick is, as you say, is thinking about, okay, at what point can I start actually selling it for money? Well, the thing is, you need to know that before you even start, because actually this business model is known as a freemium, in that you have a number of services that you basically allow out for free, and then you have a number of services which you retain as a premium. It's very difficult to initially do something for free and then to put a price on it, because people go, whoa, I used to get this for free, I'm not paying for it now, unless they are completely hooked. But that's not a particularly ethical model to use. The freemium model says you can use a certain amount of this product or a certain amount of this service or a certain level of this service for no cost. However, if you want to use more bandwidth or store more information or make more calls or make a particular type of call or exchange files in a very particular way, actually there are a subset of users who are willing to pay the premium to pay for the service. But your free level gets people on, and then the premium is a subset of that whole audience that actually pays you enough to run the whole thing. But effectively, the free bit gets you the marketing rollout, and then the premium gets you the money to run the thing. But there isn't, to the best of my knowledge, a ratio. It's really about, what does it cost you to do one thing, and can you make enough revenue back from the other thing to, cover the costs of it all? But obviously, you are saving on a marketing budget.
This is a huge area, isn't it? I mean, I remember when I started out doing a major event and more sort of commercial business event around new economic thinking. I had two objectives. One was to get a reasonable amount of revenue, and the other one was to get enough people in the space. And so you could put pricing up, reasonably high pricing, because actually for these sorts of events, the costs are quite high, but you can differentiate between public sector, private sector, and things like that. But then, of course, you can give discounts or let people in for free who wouldn't be there otherwise. So you're you're trying to keep and maintain a sort of standard pricing structure, if you like, while also discounting to get the people in, with the view that, of course, over time you've established this is the normal price, and so you ideally you're discounting less and less. Though interestingly, in some things, there are some people who are in a position to pay, especially if it's commercial, in that they're able to get their boss to agree for the company to pay for them to go to things, and there are other people who are not. So, but you might want them there. So knowing, who can pay what where, is it's quite important as well.
And to be honest, I think this works in voluntary and activism too, because fundamentally, anytime you've ever joined a club or a movement or a social group, there's a kind of layer of membership that is usually pretty accessible. It doesn't cost you a lot in time and money to participate. You get your free newsletter, you can follow events online, and they deliberately make it kind of super easy for you to be involved and for you to share it with other people. But we all know that voluntary organizations at heart need a bunch of super engaged people who are spending lots of time to make something happen. But you find those people by having that very near to free or free level of membership, so that people can be involved and they can participate, and then you sort of gradually just up the ask of them, and some of them will respond to that and some of them won't, and that's fine, and a proportion of them will find themselves as volunteers doing more, and then some of them volunteer even more and become kind of leaders in that organization. But actually this is quite a natural model, but what you do need to do is think carefully about which bits you allow out for free that spread, that then drive a level of interest in something that has a premium attached to it that actually you pay for.
But I think here the language is absolutely crucial, and the framing is absolutely crucial, because you don't the whole point about this is you're getting people in to support a cause, and they contribute resources, time, effort, whatever they can, because they believe in the cause, and they believe that with the group involved, that it's going to do something. So that it's not they don't, and I think people put different things in different parts of their head as such. So if you put something in the commercial space, they see it as a commercial, something they're going to get individually. Something that is about a cause, you have to make sure it is in their cause space in their head. So they're actually supporting a cause, not expecting necessarily, they may get positives, but they're not expecting something back in a sense necessarily.
True, but what that means is that as they ascend those levels within a kind of voluntary organization, they should absolutely feel like they are able to make a difference to the cause.
Oh, absolutely. So you've got to give them power, you've got to give them a say, you've got to give them, so they can be on the committee, they can determine strategy, so that they're part of the cause, they own the cause, and therefore they support it. which is a very different mental space to getting
I mean, in a way,
service and paying a bit more or less.
It's still incentives. You know, you're
going to enter tricky territory here as an economist.
There you go. I'm going to provoke you the last couple of minutes. I think there are still a different category, maybe, but there are still incentives that come back from contributing more. Like, we ask more of you, but you get more back. I mean, I think the thing that you want to avoid, obviously, is the idea that you're going to make bigger asks of people, but they're not necessarily going to get anything back in return. I think you have to be careful about how you frame that, because some people will not want to feel like they're being kind of paid for this, and that can be really important.
Oh, absolutely not. And we can have another conversation about the whole theory of incentives, which is non-system thinking, limited causality, and doesn't recognize motivation, values, or anything like that. We're learning a lot that we can also use to reflect on the.
Okay, so I will just protest that in my view of incentives, I was absolutely thinking about values and missions and purposes. Like, if my values are being serviced, then I feel incentivized.
But in economics, that is ignored. That's the point.
Okay. There you go. The non-economist puts his foot in it again.
But that's the problem because actually people then to try to think that, it tends to push the incentive word into a sense of, what's in it for you personally in a sort of, materialistic form. Bernard's just said, we're learning a lot that we can also use to reflect on in the Festival for Change Initiative. Wait. Absolutely, Bernard. And I've, of course, a lot of this in thinking about what we're trying to do and how we're in a way prototyping a different type of interaction, digital interaction, and learning on the way and trying to adapt and improve and build on as we go. So we're just about, it's 5 to 9 almost, and we've just about run out of questions. Well, we have. So I suggest we now have a brief break for 5 minutes before the workshop. And so we'll say goodbye for the moment. Dave's going to head off, but I'll be back here in 5 minutes just to introduce the workshop and how that's going to work. And for people who are new to the workshop, we're doing it or haven't been in for a bit, we're doing things in a slightly different way. And we'll explain all of that in a moment. Okay. Thanks very much, Dave. Cheers then. Bye.